She stepped into the palace that morning unaware that in the next few moments her entire world would tilt on its axis. Behind the gilded walls, secrets long buried were about to surface, and the truth about Prince Louis's hidden struggle would shock everyone. Every step she took echoed in the corridors, unusually silent, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. The usual polite greetings and ceremonial smiles now felt hollow, masking tension that no one dared to name. What Catherine would soon discover wasn't just a medical revelation. It was a window into a palace machinery designed to protect image at all costs, even if it meant burying the reality of her son's life. By the end of today, nothing would feel safe, familiar, or untouched. Inside, the air was deceptively calm, yet the tension radiated from every corner of the room. Catherine's eyes scanned the advisors, whose tight-lipped expressions betrayed far more than they spoke aloud. Louis, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, played quietly with a small toy, yet his laughter sounded fragile, echoing sharply against the walls as if it might shatter at any moment. Nurses exchanged subtle glances, movements barely perceptible, communicating silent warnings. The calm routine was gone, replaced with a charged atmosphere where every gesture, every pause held meaning. The words about to be spoken would not comfort or reassure. They would unveil truths she wasn't prepared to face. A mother's intuition whispered urgently. Something irreversible had already begun to unfold. The advisor's voice broke the silence, low, measured, almost formal. "Catherine," he said carefully, "we need to discuss Louise's health." The gravity of those words made the walls feel smaller, the air heavier. What followed was no gentle update or routine briefing. It was precise, clinical, and unavoidable. Catherine's heart raced as the truth unfolded in carefully chosen phrases, each one a scalpel cutting through her composure. The faces surrounding her offered no solace, only subtle tremors of unspoken realities. Tears pricked at her eyes, hands rising instinctively to cover her mouth, a futile attempt to restrain the panic bubbling inside. Every pause, every glance, every controlled breath around her amplified the severity of what she was hearing, leaving no room for denial. Shock cascaded over her in relentless waves, each one more overwhelming than the last. Her mind replayed every previous protocol, every past reassurance, now exposed as hollow contrasts to the stark reality before her. Chairs scraped sharply across the polished floors, breaths caught in throats, and Catherine felt the walls themselves pressing in. The carefully curated life she had envisioned for her son, full of smiles, appearances, and royal expectations, fractured instantly. Questions formed in her mind like gathering storm clouds. Why was she hearing this now? Who had allowed it to remain hidden? Could she have noticed earlier? The palace machinery moved with silent precision, aware that one misstep could amplify the gravity of the revelations, and Catherine stood at the epicenter of it all. Within minutes, the palace transformed into a realm of controlled urgency. Phones fell silent, aides moved with deliberate discretion, and private channels closed without explanation. Every corner seemed to anticipate catastrophe, measured routines abandoned for silent chaos. Catherine's thoughts raced, imagining her son's life quietly shifting beneath layers of secrecy and expectation. Moments that once seemed joyful, birthday celebrations, garden outings, playful laughter, suddenly appeared like fragile illusions, concealing a weighty, hidden reality. Each step she had taken, each smile exchanged in public, now seemed overshadowed by the gravity of what was unfolding. The gilded walls themselves seemed to witness a truth too immense to speak aloud, demanding acknowledgement even as it remained suppressed. As Catherine processed the shocking truth, the palace seemed to shrink around her, corridors and chambers suddenly imbued with a weight she could almost touch. Every aide, every attendant moved with quiet urgency, their precise movements hinting at secrets that could topple appearances if exposed. Her mind raced through countless what-ifs, each more terrifying than the last. Louis, the playful light of her life, was at the center of an invisible storm that the royal institution seemed more eager to contain than confront. Questions tore through her. How had such vital information remained hidden? Who had decided it was safer to shield the crown than protect her child? The very machinery built to maintain royal composure now seemed like a cage, and she could feel its cold, methodical grip tightening around her family. Catherine's maternal instincts screamed louder than protocol or reason. Every small detail, every delayed smile, every moment of hesitation from Louis now appeared as ominous signals she could no longer ignore. She remembered birthday clips, garden moments, casual interactions, all replayed in her mind like warnings that had gone unnoticed. Staff members, carefully trained to mask concern, had whispered soft doubts, but the palace culture of control had muted their voices. Each attempt she made to ask questions, to push for clarity, was met with measured responses, tight smiles, and bureaucratic delays. It became painfully clear. She wasn't merely seeking guidance. She was challenging a centuries-old system that prioritized image over truth. And in that clash, she realized the stakes were far higher than she could have imagined. Para oito. Behind closed doors, advisors moved with precision, orchestrating a quiet battle of influence and control. Every decision, every word carefully calculated to maintain the palace's polished facade. Catherine felt the tension rising like an invisible barrier between her and those who should have been allied. William, supportive yet bound by duty, urged patience, reminding her of the crown's traditions. But each measured response felt suffocating, like a hand pressing down on her chest. Catherine's instinct told her that the palace's actions were not just about protocol, they were about containment, preserving appearances and controlling who knew what and when. The very people sworn to protect her family now seemed to view her concern as inconvenient, a potential threat to centuries of image management. Every moment of delay magnified her fear and frustration. Tensions escalated further as Catherine demanded clarity, confronting advisors privately, her voice low but trembling with determination. Each meeting revealed layers of calculated silence, evasions designed to maintain control rather than address the truth. Yet, despite the obstruction, Catherine refused to relent. She reached out discreetly to trusted specialists beyond the palace's circle, seeking answers without fanfare. Tests were ordered, consultations requested, but progress stalled at every turn. The reasoning offered, optics, timing, privacy, felt more like excuses than explanations, and in the shadows, whispers of dissent began to surface. Staff members who had long followed orders quietly began sharing fragments of truth, but even these hints were carefully guarded, revealing a palace machinery more concerned with legacy and perception than the well-being of a child. The stakes had never felt so personal or so dangerous. Then came the leak, a single, encrypted communication that detonated quietly yet with unstoppable force. Details of Louis's condition, observations, and internal disagreements reached the outside world, exposing cracks the palace had worked tirelessly to conceal. Catherine learned of it not from aides or advisors, but from the headline itself, a reminder that secrecy has limits. The public reaction was instantaneous. Speculation, concern, and heartbreak spread across social media. Hashtags trended, and fans worldwide demanded answers, unaware of the controlled chaos the palace now navigated. For Catherine, this revelation was both a vindication and a new source of anguish. She had been silenced for too long, and now the world's eyes were on what the institution had tried so desperately to manage quietly behind gilded doors. The game of appearances had exploded, leaving truth in stark relief. As the palace scrambled to contain the fallout, Catherine found herself navigating a labyrinth of secrecy, tradition, and silent opposition. Every step she took, every question she asked, seemed to ripple through corridors filled with calculated tension. Advisors whispered, aides moved with studied discretion, and even familiar faces seemed transformed by the gravity of the situation. The crown, often seen as an emblem of stability, now appeared fragile, its polished image cracking under the weight of truths it had long suppressed. Catherine's maternal resolve collided with centuries of protocol, forcing her to fight not only for answers but for her son's right to be seen, understood, and protected. Each revelation deepened her dread, while also sharpening her determination to expose the reality hidden behind golden doors. The palace hierarchy moved with ruthless efficiency, every action measured, every word crafted to preserve reputation. Catherine discovered that the silence surrounding Louis's condition wasn't negligence, it was strategy. Every delay, every deflection was designed to control the narrative, to maintain an illusion of perfection while ignoring the child's needs. William, torn between loyalty and love, struggled to bridge the gap between his wife's urgency and the crown's insistence on discretion. Meanwhile, insiders hinted at behind-the-scenes maneuvering, advisors shifting priorities, and subtle power plays that would determine not just the public image of the family, but the personal stakes for those within. For Catherine, the realization was chilling. The palace cared less about her son than the perception of its own authority. Desperate for clarity, Catherine pursued every avenue available, quietly enlisting specialists and second opinions while maneuvering around layers of bureaucratic control. Each consultation brought a mixture of validation and heartbreak, confirming her fears while illuminating the gaps left by palace secrecy. Every document, every observation she obtained was carefully archived, a quiet rebellion against the institution's insistence on containment. And yet every revelation carried a weight that threatened to overwhelm her, a constant reminder that her son's future was tethered not only to health, but to the political currents swirling invisibly within the gilded walls. The struggle was no longer just about information. It had become a battle for autonomy, recognition, and the ability to act decisively in the best interest of her child. The storm reached its zenith when subtle cracks in the palace's control gave way to public scrutiny. Leaks, whispers, and social media speculation ignited global attention, forcing the institution to confront the realities it had long sought to manage quietly. Catherine, who had been silenced and sidelined, now found the world aligned with her urgency, but the palace's response was far from transparent. Meetings convened without her, narratives crafted behind closed doors, and power dynamics manipulated in ways that left her marginalized. She watched, heart heavy, as the machinery she had once respected prioritized optics over care. Each calculated move, each carefully orchestrated conversation revealed a chilling truth. The system would protect itself first, and only incidentally her son, if at all. Even as Catherine faced heartbreak, the palace's internal chess game continued. Decisions about engagements, media narratives, and future roles were debated in secret, often without her knowledge. Allies shifted, advisors repositioned, and power quietly changed hands, exposing fault lines she had never imagined existed. Louis's well-being remained the core of her concern, yet it had become entangled in a web of secrecy, strategy, and control that no single mother could navigate alone. And while the world watched headlines and speculated, the full scope of the struggle, the fight to secure truth, clarity, and protection within an institution resistant to both, remained largely hidden. The story was far from over, and Catherine knew that every revelation yet to come could shock the world even further. Catherine realized that every attempt to act swiftly for Louis's well-being was met with subtle obstruction, almost imperceptible, yet devastatingly effective. Meetings were postponed, updates delayed, and her insistence on second opinions treated as impatience. The palace, she discovered, had mastered the art of silent containment, protecting its image while leaving her to shoulder the emotional and practical weight of the crisis. Staff whispered cautiously around her, hinting at decisions made far above her reach, decisions that affected not only her son's health, but the perception of the royal family worldwide. And in that controlled chaos, she understood that knowledge alone was no longer enough. Action required courage, strategy, and resilience in the face of a centuries-old institution resistant to change. Behind the closed doors of the private wing, advisors debated what should be disclosed, how the story could be managed, and who might bear the consequences. Every consideration was weighted less by compassion and more by optics, legacy, and control. Catherine's presence, once respected, was increasingly seen as a complication, an unpredictable force that threatened carefully constructed narratives. Even William, caught between loyalty to tradition and love for his wife, could only offer measured support. And yet, Catherine refused to be sidelined. Her maternal instinct, sharpened by love and fear, became her guide. She pushed for transparency, for clarity, for interventions that prioritized Louis's health over protocol, knowing that every delay carried consequences that could never be undone. The pressure intensified as insiders revealed the depths of the palace's secrecy. Decisions about testing, therapy, and disclosure were not merely procedural, they were strategic moves in a game of influence and authority. Catherine watched as advisors weighed potential backlash against public perception, often at the expense of her son's immediate needs. Each revelation she uncovered felt like pulling a thread from an intricate tapestry, exposing patterns of control, silence, and prioritization of image over care. Every carefully worded denial she encountered became a challenge to break, a barrier to navigate, and a test of her resolve. And in these moments, the palace seemed less like a home and more like a battlefield, its gilded walls concealing struggles far darker than any public audience could imagine. Public curiosity began to swell as fragments of information leaked, social media speculated, and global audiences became aware of a narrative far more complex than anyone had guessed. Catherine, forced to watch from the inside, felt a mix of relief and anguish. Finally, the world acknowledged what she had feared, yet this recognition came with its own burden. Each headline, each trending hashtag, each inquiry from journalists intensified palace tensions, forcing advisors to respond rapidly, strategically, and often coldly. Catherine's fight had entered a new phase, one in which she needed to navigate public perception while simultaneously protecting Louis from the very system sworn to safeguard him. Every decision, every response, carried stakes far beyond the ordinary, shaping the course of not just her son's life, but the reputation of the crown itself. Amid this whirlwind, Catherine found moments of clarity that strengthened her determination. The palace's polished exterior could no longer hide its fractures, and she saw, with painful clarity, how tradition often overshadowed compassion. Allies were few, but those who supported her offered critical insights, guiding her through labyrinthine protocols and bureaucratic obstacles. Every step she took was both a rebellion and a plea for her child's right to be understood and protected. The struggle was relentless, and every revelation brought new shock, new challenges, and new stakes. Yet, even in the darkest hours, Catherine's resolve never wavered. Her fight for Louis was not just for survival, but for truth, dignity, and the right to demand accountability from an institution that had long prioritized perception over reality. Catherine discovered that behind every closed door, every whispered conversation, a silent war was raging. One fought not with swords, but with influence, secrets, and carefully curated deception. Each aide and advisor she had once trusted now seemed like a potential obstacle, balancing loyalty between the crown and truth. She realized with growing dread that the very institution meant to protect her son could be the same one keeping him at risk. Subtle maneuvers, withheld information, and hidden agendas layered over every decision. And yet, the most terrifying truth was this: some of the palace's choices were irreversible, their impact stretching far beyond public image. The question that haunted her: who could she trust when the stakes included not just Louis' life, but the legacy of the monarchy itself? Every day brought a new revelation, each one more unsettling than the last. Catherine pored over documents, internal memos, and confidential assessments, realizing that what had been dismissed as minor concerns were in fact critical signals of Louis' struggle. The palace's silence had been deliberate, a strategy to control the story and, by extension, her reaction. Insiders hinted at debates so secretive that even senior staff weren't fully informed. Decisions about testing, disclosure, and intervention made in shadowed rooms where Catherine had no seat at the table. Each fragment she uncovered raised more questions. Why delay essential care? Why prioritize appearances over her child's needs? With every new piece of evidence, her fear grew, tempered only by an unshakable resolve to uncover the full truth. Then came the most shocking moment yet: hints that some palace members viewed Louis's condition not as a tragedy, but as a potential opportunity. Power, influence, and succession plans were quietly being recalibrated while Catherine fought for answers. Every step she took, every question she asked, risked confrontation with forces far more experienced in manipulation and control than she ever imagined. Allies were scarce, the clock relentless, and the stakes unimaginable. It became clear that the battle was no longer just about health. It was about who would control the narrative and who would emerge as a decisive influence over the royal legacy. Catherine's instincts screamed that the palace's polished facade was hiding far darker motives, and that unraveling them could change everything.